I think it's fundamentally dangerous.
What you're doing.
Yeah.
What he's doing is attempting to save countless numbers of native languages on the edge of extinction.
We're losing a language every 14 days.
Every other week, we're losing a whole language.
And 60% of those losses are here in the States.
The danger isn't the language preservation itself. It's in what we, the people, are going to do with them.
We're playing with fire, with laser swords, and walking around barefoot with glasses on the ground.
Welcome to Life with Machines, powered by Lenovo. I'm Baratunde Thurston. This is an incredibly powerful episode that bridges the past and the future, and it's really personal for me. I've recently been on a journey learning more about the indigenous roots of our society, even including our very democracy. There is so much beautiful history that's been intentionally withheld from us. At the same time, I am clearly obsessed with the future and how we can approach AI in a way that doesn't repeat history's tragedies. Today, I'm sitting with someone who embodies that connection between the past and our future, Michael Runningwolf. He's a Northern Cheyenne and Lakota technologist and AI researcher working to save indigenous languages with cutting-edge technology.
It has to be in VR. It's not sufficient to teach the language sitting in a classroom in a silo of like, when you're outside playing soccer, you need to say it this way. You need to be literally playing in soccer to learn the language.
But can AI, the very symbol of high-tech modernity and colonial hypercapitalism, truly help rescue ancient indigenous languages? Or is this just another techno solution that overlooks cultural nuance while exploiting an already exploited people?
So if I'm addressing you, I embed vector data. You're approximately north of me. You're a friend. You're out of hand reach.
Indigenous languages literally contain more information, more data. Is your mind blown like mine is? Now, this isn't just a lesson in understanding how much AI development can leverage the patterns of a polysynthetic language to their advantage. No, it is also about the mindset shift we're going to have to undergo from extraction and transaction into something much more reciprocal. This is true for the nation that I'm a part of, for the world that we're a part of, and especially for Silicon Valley, which is going to need to unlearn some things.
What if you treat language like it's land? It's valuable. It's something you own. It's something you can give away. So it's data. Data is land. Data has value. You wouldn't give away an acreage of your family farm, for free. And data is the same thing.
I can't overstate this. Michael is doing something truly radical. But before he dives into all the incredible technology he's working on, we gotta talk family roots and the harsh reality of what it means to be Native in America. Let's call this context setting. Michael, welcome to Life with Machines.
Thanks for welcoming here.
What's your earliest memory of a moment with technology?
So, I grew up in government HUD housing and
housing and urban development.
It's all over the country. But for us, the Indigenous, it's pretty terrible, quite frankly. And we didn't have electricity, didn't have running water. We lived in a house, and we had this really interesting water closet that did nothing, and we had sinks that did nothing. And so we had all this parallel infrastructure. We had to haul water. We had to, bring in, cut wood. We had to have kerosene lamps. And so.
And you weren't born in the 1800s.
No, correct? This was just federal housing. We're talking about the 80s, 90s. And so the coolest thing I ever encountered in my entire life was this kerosene lamp that didn't burn my eyebrows off. They're really painful to light. You have to get them wet. You have to get the wick. You gotta get it damp. And if you get them too wet, it kind of like it creates this air bomb, shoots like a flame. And my parents got this, I think, for my grandmother or something. One of those that didn't do that. You could just go in there, reach in there, and light it up. And that was like amazing. It was like technology that just works. See, that's cool. I just never encountered that.
Yeah.
Because the lights, you sit there and play with the switch, nothing happens. And so and I was like, that's the taste where I got like, I want to use technology that just works.
Yeah, and doesn't burn off your eyebrows.
Yes. Like there's,
Michael, I
there's
have
a consequence
asked,
of technology not working.
I have asked about dozens of people that question. No one has ever referred to a technology moment involving a flame.
Yeah.
Right. That was the level and that was innovative. And you said it's still the most impressive use of technology.
Well,
so you work in AI and you're still telling me that a kerosene lantern that doesn't burn your eyebrows off is the most amazing thing.
I mean, I've worked on Alexa. My project is in partnership with Mila, the large AI lab, and it doesn't just work.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You can't just walk up to it and light it on fire and see something substantially change the way you work. And technology isn't really there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hard edges. As excited as we are for iPhones and Androids, they still suck. They're not something you could say, it's going to do what I want. Like, you don't have that comfort level. There's nothing. And the last time I ever had that feeling was this kerosene lamp that just worked. Boop, it works.
So that's the bar. We're trying to get to a level of technology that just works.
And it creates immediate, tangible value.
Yes. I love that. That's such a clear definition of what technology should do as well.
Yeah.
It works, offers clear, tangible value, and doesn't burn your eyebrows.
Yes.
We've got a new definition of technology for you.
Yeah.
Growing up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in what we call Montana, what is your earliest memory of hearing your Indigenous language?
Probably since I was in the womb. So my mom spoke it. My mom raised me in her home village where my grandmother was born. And so like we were fortunate. A lot of tribes don't have their reservations or their land. And so that was like how I was raised. And kind of, living somewhat idyllic, unfortunately. I mean, for when I say unfortunately, I mean is that not everyone got that experience.
Right. I understand that you and I share something in common, probably many things, but one in particular are smart, strong mothers who brought technology, into our worlds, into places where a lot of people weren't engaged in tech. For me, my mom was a programmer for the government in DC, in this Black neighborhood. She was like the only person with a job like that. Can you tell me about your mom and the role of your family in not just, bringing you into your culture, but bringing you into technology?
Yeah. So my mom spent her high school years here in Los Angeles. I'm not sure exactly where, but I've seen pictures. She was a surfer girl. She's this Cheyenne woman, raised in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and grew. And that was to avoid boarding schools.
Hi, I'm popping back in here because we need to pause for a moment. These boarding schools are not the types of boarding schools you're most familiar with. From 1819 to 1969, the U.S. government and Christian churches operated over 400 boarding schools aimed at forcibly assimilating Native American children. It was part of an explicit and atrocious strategy known as kill the Indian, save the man, literally. And this didn't just happen in the US. Canada has also experienced this and is going through its own reckoning. More than 80% of Indigenous school-age children, that's over 60,000 kids, were enrolled in these institutions by 1926. These were not educational havens. This was no Shute or Exeter. Children were stripped of their names, their languages, and their cultures. They faced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Many were forced into labor. And tragically, thousands died. We may never know the true number. A recent federal investigation confirmed at least 973 deaths, along with 74 burial sites identified across 65 schools. And just when efforts to uncover this dark and twisted history gained momentum, the Trump administration has cut $1.6 million in funding designated for digitizing boarding school records, hindering truth and reconciliation initiatives. But the truth, it will emerge one way or another. So when Michael talks about using AI to preserve native languages, he's not talking about technology. He's talking about healing and justice and sovereignty and ensuring that these atrocities are never forgotten and never repeated.
So my mother, being of that generation, needed to escape that. Like when she was a little kid, her parents would take them out into the hills because they knew when the government man was going to come by and steal the kids. So my mom didn't even know this was going on. They're just like, it's a kid hanging out in the hills, having fun, fishing and hunting, being a Cheyenne girl. So then that way she was able to avoid the boarding schools for the most part. And then one of her sisters got married, started living in Los Angeles. And so she moved out here just to avoid this whole system. So she was relatively unscathed from that network. I mean, obviously,
she was a refugee.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
And because of that, she went to school, became an electrical engineer and a laser lithographer, and ended up working for Hewlett Packard, and working for, I think like in today's dollars, almost $500 an hour, working for Hewlett Packard as a microchip designer. And met this crazy radical Lakota man who was my dad, who was participating in the civil rights movement at the time, it's 1970s.
Yeah.
And then they realized, I think the way they described it is they looked out the window one day and they saw their two little girls. So they have girls from prior marriage. My mom had one, my dad had one, my sisters. And they were sitting there playing on the pavement. And she's making really good money. And said, I want to raise my kids Cheyenne. And so they very intentionally gave up that life of, financial success by Western standards, and said, I want to raise my kids so that they grow up as little Cheyenne kids.
Yeah. Wow. And that explains so much of your commitment to language revitalization, right? To just being steeped in a very political family. That's part of the AIM movement, the American Indian movement. But also the merger of technology in that. The fact that your mom was designing microchips. One of the stops on your journey was in this speaker, this smart speaker that's in a lot of our homes, Amazon Alexa. Can you just tell me, what were you doing there and how did you end up there?
Yeah, so I didn't intend to be there. I was at this conference and they had like Oculus, the company had like a stand, and they were showing off this VR roller coaster with the headset, and I put it on and I squealed like a little kid and almost fainted because like I was going up this roller coaster, this in VR, and I got inspired, like, hey, this is cool. What if you could do like that emotion, capture that and use it for language and cultural reclamation? Yeah. Fast forward, I'm looking for a job. I want to work for Oculus. VR, this is the dream job. Yeah. They got bought by Facebook, so I'm trying to get a Facebook job. I knew people because I cultivated contacts, and as practice, I thought I'll just do an interview with Amazon because I heard they do really hard interviews, and I just happened to be shopping for iPhone cases on Amazon.com, and and say, "Oh, get a job in 5 minutes." Like, okay, I clicked it. And they know everything about you, so it was really all I had to do was upload my resume, right? Yeah. And so did that. And I got a call in 2 hours.
It's like prime delivery for job opportunities.
Yes. Well, no, Amazon has this commitment of first contact, 5 days, either to give you an offer or a declination.
Right.
And I embarrassingly, as you know, didn't know what the heck Alexa was. Like, what is Alexa? Yeah. I pretended to, I heard about it. It's the coolest thing in the wide world. And I had to Google it later on. Like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So being a VR nerd, accidentally, and being a big data nerd.
Yeah.
Prepped me for AI accidentally.
You're applying so much of your education, of your work experience, technology plus the revitalization of indigenous languages and cultures. Can you just give me a sense of the state of indigenous languages?
If you look at the 7,000 speaking the languages of the world, most of them are endangered. We're losing a language every 14 days.
Every other week, we're losing a whole language.
And 60% of those losses are here in the States.
When did it first occur to you to use technology to help address this emergency of languages going extinct, indigenous languages going extinct?
So the cell phone became a huge threat for language reclamation. So kids weren't interested in going to class, or they'd be sitting there on their phones, not listening to language, the elders teaching and stuff like that, and there became this disconnect. And so, what if you could put on a headset and just talk to your elders, or talk to avatars and AI, and be able to just, the burden of not knowing your own language is a huge psychological obstacle, because if you say words wrong, you might say the wrong thing and insult someone. And so Native American languages are very complex compared to English. Like, we have prosody, complex prosody, which is the sounds. And then you also have complex morphology, like how the sounds are being constructed. And English is a really simple animal compared to most languages in the world, So the problem I want to solve is second language acquisition, people who don't speak their own language who want to. So how do we get them over that hump? Because that's the problem now. It's not sufficient to start teaching the kids, because the kids need to go home to their parents and speak it in their home. So we need to address both at the same time. Have schools for the kids and solve this second language acquisition problem for the parents. So we can do this in parallel. Because that's why a lot of language immersion programs usually are failing, is because they don't address the parents. So we need to scale as quickly as possible, get teachers teaching them. Unfortunately, because of where we are, we only have a handful of teachers for a lot of languages. Like, one of the languages we're working with, they only have 15 speakers, 10 teachers. That's not a lot for a community of like 3,000 people who want to learn that. So how do we scale that? You can't clone speakers. What we can do is clone their voice, use an AI, create tutors where we create automatic speech recognition, where we can recognize what people are saying, give them a judge and say, hey, you said it wrong, say it this way, and create these little judges that help them educate. And so what we're doing right now is we're working with communities to develop curricula that they use in the classroom. In coordination with that curricula, we're going to build an AI app so that they learn in the classroom, they go through the practice sessions, and they go home, they can practice on the app, and so that they don't lose that connection. So more broadly, we're creating the small language models or micro language models.
And who's we?
First language is AI Reality.
Flair.
Yeah. So it's a coordination between Mila, largest, it's a lab in Montreal founded by Yoshua Bengio, largest AI lab in the world, and a nonprofit in the United States called Indigenous, 501c3. And a bunch of allies. We have Simon Fraser, Northeastern University in Boston. We're working with a bunch of other nonprofits. And so it's an alliance, essentially. And we have a team of about like 10 people right now, approximately, working on the goal of building this technology, curricular development, linguistic domain expertise, the community members on the ground, and then, the AI research.
How many languages are you working with?
So we're currently working with 4 languages. Language Gwich'in in Northwest Territory, I'm going from north to south, Kwakwala in British Columbia, Makah in Washington State, and Yamanawe in the Brazilian jungle. So it's exciting. We're trying to solve a big problem. But we can't do it alone. This is what we're doing right now is we're doing fundamental science. The idea would be that we publish, and we good old-fashioned tribal jealousy. Like, if Michael can do it, that Lakota kid can do it, I can do it better. And I'm hoping that if we, just doing the scientific process will inspire.
Good old-fashioned tribal jealousy. I love that. We all know that technology doesn't always run smoothly. But here at Life with Machines, Lenovo has it on lock. Lenovo's Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized and easy to scale, Smarter AI delivers outcomes that matter most to you and your business. With full-stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, Lenovo is bringing the transformative power of AI to industries, organizations, and people of all kinds. And listen, Lenovo is so much more than a bunch of stellar individual hardware components. I love using my wireless VoIP headset with my AI PC because combined, it's incredible power in the lightest of forms. Now, from a small team like ours to a massive corporation, Lenovo can provide tailored solutions for all your technological needs. Visit lenovo.com/smarterAI to discover how Lenovo is using AI for good to power people forward. Can you tell me about your project, Indigenous in AI?
Yeah, Indigenous in AI started in 2019 when I was beginning the First Languages AI, or FLAIR. I was trying to find help. And so in 2019, I happened to be invited as a speaker at NeurIPS, largest AI conference in the world.
How do you spell that?
NEROIPS. So it's the largest AI conference in the world. It's this huge industry, like all the major players, universities, corporations, and at there there happened to be this event going on by Black and AI, and Timnit Gebru was there. And I was like, what is this Black and AI?
Former researcher at Google who kind of blew the whistle on some of the things going on.
Yeah, and
there.
then some other luminaries, African-American luminaries, right? And little African, people, researchers. And I was like, this is cool. And I saw there was a Latinx in AI and a queer in AI. And I was like, where are we at? Where's the indigenous in AI? So I went to the organizer who, at the time was the organizer of the conference. And I said, hey, where's the indigenous one? And he says, why don't you start one next year? And so that is how that happened.
Yeah.
And the objective was just to find the rest of us. Like, we must exist. I'm here, this random guy working at Amazon, Alexa, in AI. There must be others. Unfortunately, there weren't that many others. It turns out I have found 10. I think there's probably 12 of us, period.
In the field.
Yes. We only graduate one PhD computer scientist a year in Mexico, United States, and in Canada, according to the CRA Tolbe survey. We do not produce very many computer scientists.
One indigenous PhD in computer science
if we're lucky.
From North America every year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The Code AI Code Camp came from that experience with NERPs, Indigenous, and AI. Well, we got people together. We found who we could. We were creating a community. Now we need to get more people into the door. And the Code AI Code Camp is that attempt of like, how do we get little kids into high schoolers, 13 to 18, into college? And it's been successful. We've been doing it for 4 years now. Every kid who's gone through us, who's graduated high school, is now in a 4-year computer science degree. Yeah, it's amazing. These kids are literally like me, kids who they don't have internet, they don't have electricity. They grew up in HUD, federal HUD housing without good. It's possible.
And it probably makes them more efficient coders too.
Yeah, because they're tough. And I think this is what scares me. There's this little kid who's like, sorry.
It's all right.
No, it's just like there's this little kid out there who's really going to save our languages, who's smart enough, better than me, and is going to be critical to this research and this work. And we're not going to get to them in time. They're going to get stuck in the environment and that life of drug abuse and substance abuse, and the oppression of colonization, living on the res, we're not going to allow them to flourish.
Yeah. And
100%, we're probably letting, hundreds of those kids through our fingers every day. So we need to do something about that. I don't have an easy solution, because this is not teaching Lakota kids AI is resource intensive. Our funding partners are always saying, why does it cost $20,000 per kid? Because they eat, they're teenagers, and it's just sort of like, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
And I wish we had more of us to be teachers, because if I'm not there, if me or someone else isn't teaching them, knowing well, but someone has to do the work too. So it's just sort of, we're stuck, right? And so I think we can do it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that I have hope is that one of our best coders a couple of years ago was this little 13-year-old girl, never touched a computer, maybe at school, and was just a genius at it. And we asked her, what's your favorite thing about the code camp? And like her response was, we buy them toys, we got an Alienware laptop so they could game and they could do the AI, and we thought their answer was, we play video games every day. And I was like, we eat every day, was her response. She was being raised by her grandmother on the fixed income, and they don't eat every day. They don't eat 3 meals a day, and she's her best coder.
Yeah.
And like, we're, I think, changing lives, we need to do more, but we're not.
Well, I just want to acknowledge what y'all are doing. I know this story. My community has been through very similar things, and there's so much genius literally locked up. And I was in after school programs that helped me eat more and learn more at the same time. So I'm a product of some of this type of investment, and my commitment to you is that your time here is time well spent. We will get the word out. The more people who see this, who understand what you're building, not just for you or your people or indigenous people, but for all of us, because that's how this whole interconnected world works. We're all dependent on each other. We'll do what we can. And I know it, you being here is you're not with one Lakota kid right now. So we'll try to balance that out and make sure this gets to as many kids as possible, as many possible allies and partners as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. What makes indigenous languages unique and a special challenge/opportunity for AI to assist in their revitalization?
Indigenous languages in North America are very information dense, and they have error correction built into them. Meaning, in AI and software, when you're the internet, when you're talking to the internet, when you're sending a signal message or WhatsApp, whatever, it goes over the internet, and more often than not, data gets lost. There's these error correcting codes built in so that you don't have to waste time retransmitting the data. Native American languages have that built into them. The very structure of the language allows, if you only heard a part of the word, you can reconstruct the first part of the word. So if you know the prefix, you can estimate what the suffix are. And so there's very little room for misunderstanding and ambiguity in using these languages versus, say, English, which only has like 2 rules. Plural things have an S and verbs have an ing. That's the only 2 rules in English. There's no rules. Compared to indigenous languages, which is very structured, the rules are so structured that if you miss part of the word, you can reconstruct the other part of the word. And most languages are like that. Most of those 7,000 languages have error correction built into them. African languages, South Asian languages, languages in Siberia, languages in South America. It's an evolutionary benefit to have error correction in your language because you don't have misunderstanding, right?
And it feels intrinsically more sustainable.
Yeah. It's just weird that these non-polysynthetic languages conquered the world somehow, you know.
I've never thought about colonialism that way. Part of my understanding of indigenous languages, big universe to simplify and boil down, but there's much more of a reliance on the oral tradition versus the written tradition.
Yeah.
Even more faith in oral transmission than writing in some cases. What does the bias toward oral in indigenous languages mean for the attempt to preserve and revitalize them, especially with AI?
Here's another essay for whoever's out there. I'm too lazy to write, looking at the cameras. How polysynthetic languages make oral tradition easier. Because with English, there's a lot of ambiguity. Like playing telephone.
Right.
Within 4 or 5 people, you've lost the message. But if you have a very concise, error-correcting language, oral tradition stops being messy, it becomes precise.
Right. I've been recently learning and interacting more with certain indigenous elders and gaining a respect and appreciation for the potential superiority of oral transmission over generations versus documents.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with hallucinations and like basic representation of established facts in the current large language models. You're talking about an existing language which has even more dimensionality to it. You know, literally there's more information in the words in a polysynthetic language, in an indigenous language, than most of us understand from English.
Yeah.
So then how does the technology you're working with represent that? It feels like it's much more to encode and decode reliably. How are you cracking that case?
It has to be in VR. It's not sufficient to teach the language sitting in a classroom in a silo of like, when you're outside playing soccer, you need to say it this way. You need to be literally playing in soccer to learn the language, you know. And so
it's like an embodiment of the language.
You have to embody, and I think that's where the VR comes in. And I think that's also is missing from these large language models. You know, like the current strategy is that if you read all the text, somehow you're going to get it, but you're missing the reality of the, and also you're using a language that doesn't even embed the 3D-ness of the reality.
Yeah. How are indigenous communities responding to your efforts to use AI and other technologies to revitalize and keep alive their languages?
It's very typical rule of thirds. 1/3 has no interest whatsoever, adamantly against it. And I think that's good. One third who sort of, yeah, this is interesting, or maybe it's for me, and then one third who are enthusiastic advancers.
Why do you think it's good that 1/3 are adamantly against it?
Because I think it's fundamentally dangerous.
What you're doing?
Yeah, I think what we're doing is we're playing with fire with laser swords and don't know what we're doing, and walking around on a barefoot with glasses on the ground. We're being very careful. We're conscious and aware that's the situation we're in, but it's still dangerous, right?
What's the danger?
Loss of data, exploitation of indigenous communities. If we're not careful, this is another tool of exploitation. It is today. And if AI had no interest in indigenous cultures and languages, we'd probably be better off, but that's not realistic. There's a lot of research and interest in indigenous languages and enabling it for AI from a very colonial perspective, and that puts it at risk. So someone needs to do something outside of government legislation, which is unlikely. We need to demonstrate to the wider AI community that we need to treat indigenous communities and languages and cultures very carefully. And so back to what's the real risk here? Language models perform better if you have a diversity of languages in them. So like an English recognizer, English, Llama, ChatGPT, Gemini, if you have a diversity of language, even though it speaks only English, if you have diversity of languages, they perform better. Furthermore, the research is showing that if you show these language models indigenous data, they perform even better. There's economic value in better performing AI. That's what they're trying to do. But they're doing practices that harm the community. They harm the biome. Like the Pfizer going into the jungles to literally helicopter out, endangered plants. That's what's going on with languages. They're going into communities that don't have enough speakers, sticking microphones in their mouths and creating proprietary data sets that the community is being locked away from them. So they're spending time and energy, resources, taking them away from the communities and locking them up in the proprietary, resource, data sets. If we engage in this technology, we're opening ourselves up for that conversation. Because the fact that I'm doing this means that I'm legitimizing the usage of AI for indigenous communities. So I think it's good that communities be wary of this technology. Don't do it because someone native is doing it. Do it because you want it and you're fully aware of the risks involved.
How are you moving differently than the big frontier model providers who are dropping in and extracting?
What if you treat language like it's land? It's valuable. It's something you own. It's something you can give away. So it's data. Data is land. Data has value. And you wouldn't rent out for free to a neighbor, for your front yard, right? You wouldn't give away an acreage of your family farm, for free without, and data is the same thing. It's a unit of value. And if we treat our language community data as land, we shouldn't be giving it away for free. We need to extract value for ourselves, or at least derive value for ourselves in these kind of interactions. And that is the fundamental assumption that we're making. So when we work with communities, we pay them fairly. Often this kind of research is that they go in there, here's $50, give us some audio, right? We're going in and say, let's pay them a fair salary so that they can, feed their family by participating. And number two, so technically that data now becomes work for hire, technically. So, I'm paying them to collect data, so now suddenly technically it's mine. So we have a license that says, even though we have rights to own this data, we are surrendering the rights to a community partner, a community entity. So the data being collected is the value, the ownership is being assigned to a tribal entity, be it the federal government or a nonprofit. It depends on the situation, right? So we never take ownership of the data. We are licensing the data, and we're also paying them to collect the data.
Right.
And and that's the difference, the core difference of the assumption that data is land, and they deserve compensation. And we're not trying to steal it. We're just, if they withdraw their consent, within 90 days is what the contract says, we'll erase their data. We'll get rid of it, purge it from our systems, and give them a hard drive. Like, here's your data, and then no questions asked.
Is anyone else following this lead of yours? It's not a very corporate process. Most companies, they want proprietariness. They want their competitors to not have access to the same data sets. They certainly are not going to assign the rights to the data back to the people they're collecting it from.
I'd say we're being inspired by our elders. So when there's real community research, there's no question that who owns the data. Like, this isn't, but because we have AI involved, we have institutions involved, we have different partners involved, we have to be explicit. And plus, that contract, when we're kind of in a weird drafty stage, we're still kind of revising it.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of release it as this is what you should be asking for. If Microsoft or Google come along and say, we want your data, you should say, hey, something like this.
Yeah.
And that's the rigor we're trying to do. So that's the little bit that's actually kind of hard. It's like, how do we generalize this for other communities?
But there's so many historical parallels to this.
Yeah.
If Columbus comes a knocking, here's how you respond, right? If the church comes a knocking, here's how you respond. If the school comes a knocking, and maybe in some cases you don't respond.
Or the Manhattan trade.
Yeah, maybe you shut it down.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no trade. Maybe there's no exchange because there's no terms that would maintain your sovereignty.
Yeah.
And so this idea of determining yourself, of owning your own culture, of having, in this case, data sovereignty, feels like such an essential principle to how you're operating, and how even if you're not working with some of these tribal entities, you're at least signaling to them, this is how you should show up in the marketplace that we're in.
Yeah. And I think to make this safe, get the glass off the floor, sweep out the glass, put away the laser swords, we need to own the infrastructure itself.
Yeah.
We need tribal sovereign compute infrastructure. And I think that will also be economically beneficial. Like, how do we get away from being almost exclusively dependent upon either resource extraction or casinos or any kind of, we need a sustainable strategy that coexists with the modern industrial age.
Yeah.
And
there's a beautiful possibility here. When you describe to me that any language model gets better when there's indigenous languages inside of it. Like any effort to fight climate change gets better when you take into account traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous people.
Yeah.
Then what becomes important is how you relate to those indigenous communities so that it doesn't repeat the colonial strain, the colonial path and that history. So I hope you're very successful in this, because for me, it's just, if you don't care about indigenous languages, you do, right? You just don't know it yet. It's not about like, I need to speak Crow or Lakota or Cheyenne, but if I want ChatGPT to be better, it would be beneficial if OpenAI had an honorable, good relationship with these communities to make their stuff better.
Yeah, I think we need tribal institutions that work for us, like some sort of data co-op. Like, that's something not going to happen now, but it's something I want to start maybe in 2 to 3 years, is an institution whose sole job is to protect rights of data, indigenous data.
Yeah.
Being able to, we need it now. I was recently, everything needs it. All of our economies need it. Like, I was at a tribal gaming casino convention a few weeks ago randomly. And they're struggling with this too. Like, they have a bunch of data. There's a lot of AI providers. They're saying, we'll give you analysis for free, but it's not for free. Yeah. They want your data, they want your land. And so I think across our entire tribal economies, we need some sort of institution to help us protect that. Even if it's just a legal advice of like, here's how IP works, and here's what kind of contracts. And then, as a co-op too, you then have the inertia of a large collective of like having a lot of data that becomes very valuable. Being able to license access to it. Now you have like this, entity with economic power, legal authority. And if, one of these corporations misbehave, they have the lawyers and wherewithal to go after them.
The data co-op, a data confederacy.
Yeah. Yeah. The Confederacy and the real Confederacy.
Exactly.
Not
the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, not the Southern one.
Yeah.
Western worldview, indigenous worldview. You can make a table about where these things are different. There's one that's hierarchical, much more relational. There's one that's extractive, and one more regenerative and sustainable. When you apply those principles on the ground to model in it, for example, What are some examples of the ways that an AI grounded in, or the development of technology grounded in Indigenous worldview differs from technology grounded in a Western worldview?
I don't think there's necessarily something fundamentally wrong with the capitalist system. I think what really is missing is the tribal closeness or greater family model. Okay, what I mean is that, so you go to Europe and you go to a little village and a little old lady is going to greet you, or old man, invite you in and invite all their friends, force you to eat a bunch of food, and insist that you pay for your food with a story, or, not day one, that's never explicit, but that's implied. And that's the same exact experience you'd find in the Cheyenne village, Lakota village, Haudenosaunee village, Yakima village, Swinomus, and the list goes on. And I think the American experience misses that, because you have the suburbs. It's very normal in the suburb to not know who the heck your neighbors are. Mm-hmm. No one wants to live in a multi-unit apartment complex with a shared playground. That's antithetical to the American dream. But that's also the projects. That's the ghettos. That's where you see, deep cultural roots form, inner LA, or the reservation. People living in a community and trying to survive in this harsh world. And I think that's the real problem. So lacking that concept of greater community, we're building technology and infrastructure that ignores that. And so, why is social media so powerful in the West? It's because you literally can't go to your community and chat. You can't literally get FaceTime with your friends and family in the States. So we need the technology FaceTime, right? Versus if you're growing up in a little village in Germany, it's something you can do every day, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the real problem. And that's the difference between the technology we're creating, that we're not trying to replicate in some weird UI model of replicating indigenous values. What we're trying to do is build better bridges within an existing community that we're not trying to supplement. We're not supplant, we're trying to supplement that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look forward 1 to 5 generations, what do you hope becomes of these efforts that you're a part of now, as far as revitalizing Indigenous languages with technology?
I think this is a bit sci-fi.
Great.
So I think we're going to enter a different economic age soon, where borders don't really matter. It's going to matter, but it won't really matter. I think Bitcoin is an evidence of that. I'm not a cryptocurrency bro, but you can kind of see the edges of this new era emerging where unitary states stop mattering. In the same way the EU, it's a confederacy of sovereign states, but it doesn't really matter anymore. And I think the world is going to become more like that, in at least the Western world. And my hope is that in the next few generations, tribes become sovereign economic entities in their own right. Yes, we're domestic sovereign states in the United States and also in Canada and Mexico, but that won't matter anymore. I think the AI economy, which we don't exist in it. The AI economy is right now is hype. It's like these large corporations spend hundreds of billions of dollars on matrix multiplication, and that's not the AI economy. The AI economy is the transformative impact of having agents acting on our behalf and conducting business, and it won't matter anymore the fact that there's a border so long as you have internet connection. And so my hope is that eventually we have a meta state of indigenous tribes existing as a single confederacy, the little c, Haudenosaunee style, versus the historical, and a loose confederation of tribes participating in an economic meta state, because there's no reason why we can't have, look at today, we have very large resource-rich tribes like the Seminole or, the Kickapoo, these huge casinos, and they've invested that money into the economy, and they've diversified. They're not just casino tribes anymore. They're they're, they have huge economic impact. Like the Chickasaw almost own all of Oklahoma now. There's no reason why we couldn't be major players in the future AI economy if we start making investments today.
Yeah.
And prepare the way for our grandchildren so that they will exist in a sovereign economic state where they are citizens of their tribe. And that means something economically. Like if you're Lakota and you're card carrying Lakota, that means you get like 50 an extra Bitcoin a day or whatever, tangible impact of being tribal and tangible value of speaking your own language. There'll be economic value in a market in Germany being able to deal with Lakota AI.
Michael Running Wolf, is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation?
The last thought I would like to say is that the research we're doing isn't DEI research, which has never been an accusation from you, certainly not.
Yeah.
But I'm always kind of like get lumped in with that. There are mathematical problems we have to solve that no one has ever done. It's green space research. And because there's this culture of we only need to do English, it's a huge blind spot in science, like literal science. Yeah. We're missing scientific progress because of this blind spot. And so my message is this isn't DEI work. This is just work that no one's doing because we have a cultural impediment. And so I think we need to invest more, and wherever your listeners are, you are near a tribe, you're on tribal land, and they would love your help to build this kind of technology.
Thank you so much for being here with us on Life with Machines. This is a beautiful conversation, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Running Wolf, for joining us today and sharing your vision and your wisdom. It's been a truly eye-opening conversation about the intersections of technology and culture and power. You can listen to an extended version of this interview on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, please like, subscribe, rate, comment, review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Like your friendly neighborhood tech bro who wants to invest in something truly meaningful. This could be that thing. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at lifewithmachines.media for behind the scenes and more, including increasing amounts of content covering this burgeoning field of responsible AI, giving us actions we can take, and letting you know what you need to know about how this future is emerging and how we can shape that emergence. Thanks.